We are back, 2025 DFS, and you guys know the drill. There was no way I was going to be doing these shows without my guy, JMToWin. I can't even remember if this is year 3, year 4 for us. I think year 3, but we're going to keep this partnership rolling. This 1-week season block party themed episode is also this year going to be followed by a show I'm calling Bully the Sims from our friends over at Run the Sims. Youdacao and a rotating cast of the Sim Lords over there will be joining in the second half of these shows. But JM, so excited to run things back and get everybody ready for week 1 salary cap DFS.
Yeah, I got to apologize to anybody watching on YouTube. I was looking down as you started your intro. Usually you're the only one on screen. And I was kind of getting my notes ordered, and then I look up and realize I was on screen. So lack of professionalism here in week 1. But we'll try to make up for that with the content and the knowledge that we'll bring to the table here.
Yeah, there's so many things I want to talk to you about and pick your brain. I definitely want to start a little bit more macro because there's a lot of people like me. I haven't been playing other salary cap sports. I know a lot of people are playing MLB or NBA and MMA, so they're kind of in the rhythms of how we were thinking about winning these tournaments. But for people like me who are reorienting our focus from best ball, like where should our mindset be at as we start diving back into building these teams on DraftKings?
I think the first thing we should think about is that every week is unique. Every week is different. We talk about that all the time throughout the season. And anybody who's watching the show, listening to the show every week will hear that from me plenty. But week 1 in particular, we have this unique dynamic in terms of where the field likes to gravitate. A lot of times it's rookie first round wide receivers. So last year, the Malik Neighbors and the Marvin Harrison Jr.'s, because they're, quote, underpriced and we don't know what their range of outcomes is. And so people like to gravitate toward those. We have underpriced players, we have overpriced players, we have lots of question marks. We had 2 years ago, we had Puka Nacua at 3K, putting up whatever it was, 25 plus DraftKings points at sub 0.5% ownership, where you have a situation where if you can pay attention to where they're opening certain teams and who might step into those roles, you have backfields that aren't really yet to be decided, where people think they know where the ball is going and they might be surprised in week 1. So whether that's people thinking that the Jags or the Commanders is a split backfield, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's Tank Bigsby with a new head coach there. Maybe it's Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt being the reason that Brian Robinson was traded, or whether it's a spot like the Patriots where Travion Henderson's looked great in preseason. Everyone's expecting him to be the guy. But what if in week 1 it's still Ramondre Stevenson getting 60% of the work, getting 2 touchdowns, something like that? So, there's a lot to play around with. And then on top of all that, like I alluded to, the looser pricing. So somebody like Christian McCaffrey, who's 7,300 in week 1, and typically we're paying 8,500 for him, 9K for him if he's healthy and in his rhythm. Or somebody like Tyreek Hill, who's 6,700 in week 1, coming off his down year last year. And what if he's 8,200 a few weeks from now? And so, there's a lot of interesting things to look at. There's a lot of interesting things to think about in terms of you could really build a roster this week that you could feel like, hey, 5-6 weeks from now, these players put onto a roster together would cost me 60K in salary cap instead of 50K in salary cap. But then there's still the question of like, but is this the week where that actually pays off? And so, lots of fun stuff to pay attention to and play around with this week. And one of the more unique weeks on the season, and one of the weeks with more edges, I would say, than other weeks in the season as well.
Yeah, how do you think about that dynamic? Because I think you could make a case in either direction, right? On the one, I keep using the phrase best ball brain, where we're drafting these rookies, these players who can break out deep into the season, because that's how these tournaments are structured. That's when you really want them peaking. There's a temptation to be like, let me get all these fun rookies in my week 1 DFS lineup. And it's like, well, it doesn't always, hit in week 1. But then on the flip side, there is this idea of what if some of these guys have bigger roles out of the gate than expected? And like you said, it's a Puka Nacua level jump because they're 7,000 in the following week. So how do you balance that enthusiasm for getting ahead of where we might be in a couple of weeks, while also making sure that, we're not, making suboptimal decisions for the reality of week 1?
Yeah, well, so part of it comes down to the matchup and the situation and all that, and what the game environment is that we expect. And then part of that comes down to just an understanding of what it's like to be a rookie in your first NFL game. So just pulled up Malik Neighbors. He had, super high owned last year, week 1. He had 11.6 DraftKings points. But week 2, he had 31.7. Week 3, he had 28.2. So we see stuff like that as well, where these guys step in, everybody's excited to play them. They go all in on that play. These are humans in their first NFL game, right? And so there's a lot that goes into that. Marvin Harrison Jr., another one, highly owned, 1.4 points in week 1 last year, 32 points in week 2. He was 7.2K in salary last year, and everyone was playing him in week one. He put up 1.4 points. And so, there's a lot to think about here. And I think that kind of treating this like a normal week and thinking about hunting down those edges in an isolated week, the same way you would any other week, is really going to be your best mindset for that. I'm actually doing something cool this year on the site. I'm doing like a journal on Discord throughout the week.
Oh, nice.
And so I started that yesterday, and it's going to be for Inner Circle members. But right now, this week, everything on OWS is free, so it's kind of open to everybody. And so I've just kind of been working through some thoughts. And so you can kind of watch me ping pong around on like, hey, maybe like somebody like Ricky Pearsall is like, what if Ricky Pearsall steps in and has a huge game? Like, what if Cooper Kupp isn't bad? What if he's still like, he put up 35 points in week one last year. He had another 31-point game. He had a high ankle sprain in week two that he really was struggling with all season long. And so, there's a lot of fun stuff to play around with. And then the cool thing about that journal style is I can kind of play around with ideas and then see where my thoughts settle as we get deeper into the week.
Yeah, I love that journal idea. And it kind of piggybacks off of one of the things I love that you do on the site in season is that kind of Sunday morning follow-up, because a lot of your writing will be done early in the week, but then things change. You're messing around with your builds and stuff, and you get that clarity. So I like the idea of getting to see your work as you kind of arrive at those thought processes. Yeah, the other thing that I think you do so well that we get into as the season progresses is like how these teams are deploying their offense, how these teams win and that stuff. And that can be hard to forecast for week one because there's a lot of question marks. I mean, the amount of teams that either have new coaching staffs or new quarterbacks is like really high. So do you find yourself making more decisions based on just like player talent level, or how do you kind of, guess exactly how these offenses are going to look for a week one DFS purpose?
Yeah, so for me, I think that ever since I was at Roto Grinders, which if you're new here, that I was there from 2013 to 2017, and ever since then, like my greatest edge in NFL DFS has been my understanding of coaches and players, because each game is so isolated and each game is so game plan specific for most teams. And so the more we can understand coaches and how they want to deploy their players, how they want to try to win an individual game, the more we can kind of cater our approach. And that's something that projection systems have a really hard time with, which gives an edge to players in NFL DFS who can kind of look at things through that lens. And so, there's a lot of strategy and theory in terms of how we're building our rosters, how we're maximizing our floor and our ceiling. We always talk about if we could play out the slate 100 times, where would we make the most money? So there's a lot that goes into it from that just like math and strategy perspective. Where's the field zigging and we can be zagging? But there's also a component of like, we can trust our knowledge on these teams and coaches and players. So this week, I started out my journal in my JM's journal in Discord, and I broke down like overview thoughts on the 12 games on this week one slate. And I didn't look at over-unders, and I kind of grouped the games by category based on where I expected the scoring to be. So there's 6 games on the slate that have an over-under of 46.5 or 47.5 this week. 5 of those 6 were my top 5 games, right? And I had like a middle tier, and then I had a bottom tier. And the bottom tier, there was five games there, and it was there's 5 teams on the slate with an over-under of 43.5 or lower, or 7 games with 43.5 or lower, but all 5 of my bottom tier games were in there. So you kind of get this sense of like, okay, my view and understanding of these coaches and players, I'm able to get a sense of like where these over-unders should fall. And then also understanding that over-unders have a range of outcomes, right? One game that's 42.5 and another game that's 42.5 could have a totally different range of outcomes, could skew totally differently to the upside, where one 42.5 might be worth playing, another one might not be. And so, the more we can kind of understand the coaches and how they want to win games, the more edge we have, especially early in the season when we're still waiting for data and analytics to pile up, because there's so much value in the deeper dive data and analytics that we can tap into. But early in the season, we really have to understand how these coaches are seeing their teams and how they're wanting to deploy their players in order to win games.
Are there any macro NFL trends that are on your mind as we enter the season? Obviously, last year, we kind of had this big correction as far as the teams running way more. We saw all of those veteran running backs who changed teams really dominate. Carries, scoring was down on the whole for the league. Is any of that impacting your decisions? Do you think things might revert a little bit back to past happy ways of a couple of years ago? How are you thinking about that stuff?
Yeah, so the NFL, they say the NFL is a copycat league, right? And that's because teams look at what other teams are doing and what's working, and they try to emulate that. And then you have forward-looking coaches who then try to say, where is the tail of the trend moving? What's everybody chasing? And what does that mean is going to be next? So I don't think we're quite at that point yet where So if you were the Patriots and you drafted Aaron Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski, you switched to this 2 tight end set. Well, other teams started doing that, right? And so then in order to combat that, you had to start building defenses to try to stop these 12 personnel offenses that could do so much. And so then offenses could start saying, well, if all the defenses are being built this way, what can we do to adjust to that? So I think we're still in this phase where teams are building more toward the trenches because they've seen the success of the Lions. They've seen the success of the Eagles. They've seen these teams that build from that center outward, and they see how much value that has. And on top of that, I mean, we've seen the statistics over the last few years of the record of teams the week after they play the Lions. We can get so deep, especially like a front office can get so deep into data and analytics and spreadsheets that we forget this is a physical man's sport on the field, where if you can break somebody else's will, that makes a big difference. You hear players talk about that. Last year, I brought this up a few times with Derrick Henry. He talked about what does he look for when he watches film? He looks for the guys who are giving less than maximum effort on the defense because he wants to attack those guys and run them over. Because if he can do that early in the game, then that sets him up to be able to have those big plays later in the game, right? Because that guy doesn't want to get in front of him again later in the game. And so when we can think about things through that lens, we can recognize, okay, these teams are trying to find ways to physically dominate another team, to impose their will on another team. It's harder to quantify stuff like that, but those are things we can be looking for and understanding, and then recognizing which teams are building for that, which teams are building differently, and which teams have an understanding of their individual strengths and weaknesses and how to actually exploit that and exploit the opposing team's strengths and weaknesses.
One thing I wanted to touch on before we get into maybe more specific slate overview stuff, is just some thoughts on the things we're talking about. What kind of contests is it geared to? Obviously, this isn't a cash game show. We're not just trying to identify the very best plays to put in your lineup. We're trying to, teach you how to build lineups that can win first place. But are there any other kind of like FAQ disclaimers that we should give maybe new people to this show on how to think and use the kind of things we're talking about?
Yeah, I'll lay out kind of like a simple, I guess, like verbal graph on this, that if you are like the fewer contestants you're competing against. Well, let's start with this. Most of the money in DFS is in first place finishes. If you're not eventually getting first place finishes, you're falling behind in your bankroll, right? You have to have those top 1% and really top like 0.1% finishes over time. Now, if you're putting one entry into a 10,000 entry tournament, you could have an edge in that tournament and it could still take a really long time for you to see that edge play out and for you to get that top finish, right? But the fewer the entries, and I say all that to say, even in a smaller field contest, 100 entry contest, you're still targeting first place. You're not playing safely to try to cash. But the smaller the tournament field, the less risk you want to take on. So I was laying out in that JM's journal today, which again, everything on 1 Week Season is free this week. That journal is free. So you can go to OWS and find our Discord and check that out. I'll keep dropping thoughts in there throughout the week. But I was talking in there about the idea of playing like a Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt plus Tank Bigsby roster. And talking about you're taking on more risk because you got a lot of question marks. Is Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt going to be the lead running back for Washington? Is Tank Bigsby going to be the lead running back for the Jags? And you're not saving a dramatic amount of money because it's week one. You got a lot of 5,700, 5,500, 6K running backs who have legit roles. Those guys are Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt's 4K, Tank Bigsby's 4,600. So you're saving some salary. But what's more important than the salary you're saving is that your roster looks different now because now you have an extra 2,500 or 3K to allocate to wide receivers. So you can have one of these rosters where you've got 2 cheap running backs and then a bunch of high-priced wide receivers. So now your salary structure looks different. You're doing something very different from the rest of the field. But then I followed that up with saying, this is probably something that you want to think about in larger field play. You don't need to take on the risk of question marks on the role for Tank Bigsby, question marks on the role for Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt if you're competing against 100 people or 500 people. And so there's this like pendulum that swings of like how much risk you want to take on. You're always targeting ceiling outcomes. So it's not worth it to just say, hey, this guy's safe, this guy's safe, this guy's safe. You're not going to win a tournament that way, even with 100 entries. But there are these guys who it's like, I know what their role is. You could take on a Jonathan Taylor and a Jahmyr Gibbs and a Christian McCaffrey and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like you can load up your roster with these types of guys in a smaller field tournament and worry less about the ownership because you know what their role is. You know they're not going to kill your roster and then the ceiling is still there to win you a tournament. And then as you move deeper down the risk curve, or deeper down, like the number of entries, you want to move deeper down the risk curve in order to access that ceiling in like spots where there are fewer people joining you trying to get that ceiling on those players.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely a good way to think about it. And, in using that as kind of a sliding scale based on the contest you're playing. Like I really like to play the SPY, the $100 single entries, that they have various sizes even within those price points. So there's, a 555 entry SPY. There's one that goes all the way up to 5,000. So I would just make that caveat to kind of calibrate how you're thinking about this information. Even the lineup we build at the end of the show, that lineup might make sense more for a smaller field tournament than say if you're just playing in the large field milli maker against thousands and thousands of entries. So I do think that's worth mentioning here. Let's go ahead and start to do a little bit of a slate overview here. Obviously, we're spending a little bit more time than usual on the macro concepts here, just because there's a lot going on as we all transition over to playing salary cap after a long hiatus here. But you mentioned finally looking at some of the totals here in this game. It is a really interesting slate as far as both the pricing seeming very loose. You mentioned the Christian McCaffrey price. We also have a lot of games where nothing's really separating, as far as no games with a total well over 50. They've saved all of those for prime time. So just specifically with this week 1 slate in the game environments, what's kind of jumping out to you?
Yeah, so we got to be cautious about not getting so salary conscious, because ultimately, once the game started, it doesn't matter what you spend for a player. It matters how many points they get. But we do, you mentioned what I had said, right? Christian McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill and some of these other guys who are, Jonathan Taylor, he was priced 6,900 and above all season last year, finished with 28 to 40 something points in 3 straight games. He was priced in the high 7Ks late in the season. He's coming into the season at 6,800. So it would have been his lowest price the entire year last year in a good matchup against Miami, right? So you have spots like that. Then you also have guys like Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, Jahmyr Gibbs, Nico Collins. Like these guys are priced kind of where they were priced all year last year. So you have this interesting setup where there are guys priced appropriately and guys underpriced. And I do think that there's going to be a tendency in terms of just how the field likes to attack week 1, thinking out loud here, but how the field likes to attack week 1 is you could see the Tetaroa McMillans and the Emeka Bukas paired with the Jamar Chases and the Puka Nacuas and the Bijan Robinsons. And so what you end up with is question marks on rookies in their very first game, paired with guys who are appropriately priced. And so I do think that there are edges in kind of looking at some of the other ways to do this. And I've built some early rosters where just kind of look through whether it's a Michael Pittman, who, we talked about in our best ball draft, and, people were paying 5,800, 6K for him gladly a year or two ago. And so whether it's somebody like him or Tyreek Hill or Ricky Pearsall or Jonathan Taylor, like guys who are underpriced, James Conner, and you kind of look at this roster and you're like, man, like this is a 57K roster. This is a 55K roster. This is a 60K roster in terms of what the salary should be on these guys. And so we can't get so married to that idea that we're just thinking in terms of value consciousness. But at the same time, if we could play out the slate 100 times and you just focused on building rosters of guys who are going to be priced higher later in the year, you would come out ahead financially over time on that. And so, I think that's one of the interesting components to think about this week is it's not just that there's people who are underpriced, but a lot of guys who are appropriately priced in the field will still flock toward them.
Yeah, I think your inclination is completely correct. Even just messing around with some teams earlier today, that studs and duds specifically on the rookies, because, as the season progresses and these pricing, gets more efficient, a lot of times the guys at the bottom of the barrel, the sub 4K guys, I mean, we'll talk through them each week. It's not always the most exciting plays. We're starting to get into really fringe, like wide receiver 3-4 types. But right now it's all exciting because we have this optimistic outlook on every one of these players' careers and hitting the ground running. And so that kind of combination with the salary relief is going to push people into feeling really good about these quote unquote punt plays. So I do like that idea of balanced builds being interesting. Are there any game environments that you're specifically looking at, whether it is because of a total, that being a dome game, just how the teams match up with each other? Are there any games that interest you more than others?
Yeah, I think that if we play out the slate 100 times, this Tampa Atlanta game is going to top the slate more times than any other game. So it's got this 47.5 total, and there are other games with a 47.5 total. When I wrote up kind of what I saw as the top 4 game environments, When I mentioned that, when I said I expected that to have the highest total of the bunch, I was kind of surprised. I said anything from 47.5 to 51.5 for that game wouldn't surprise me. But I was kind of surprised when I looked at everything this morning. It was like, oh, that one's 47.5, which is the low end of what I expected. And it was matching these other 47.5 games. So I like that one kind of as the standout. Do we want to pause there, or you want me to hit on the other three that I kind of mentioned up at the top?
Yeah, no. Yeah, why don't you kind of do a couple high level one, and then I'm sure when we go position by position, we'll get more granular on the players.
Okay, so Carolina and Jacksonville. Look at how Carolina's offense ended last season. Actually, kind of interesting. We have like two straight Buccaneers offensive coordinators, Dave Canales with Carolina and Liam Cohen with Jacksonville, who have gone to these other teams in the South. And so, yeah, this is an interesting one where you've got two teams with offensive identities. Carolina's an ascending offense, bad defense. Jacksonville has a good pass rush, but question marks in the secondary. And so plenty of opportunity for fireworks in that one. And that's one where it won't be surprising if both teams score in kind of the mid-20s, but it also won't be surprising if both teams score in the 30s. We have Cincinnati and Cleveland, where realistically, like if we step back and we release what we saw last year and what we saw in the preseason, you could say, like, there's so much parity in the NFL that no defense is as bad as the Bengals were last year. And therefore, the Bengals will regress to the mean, and they brought in Al Golden, who should be a good fit for them. And the Bengals should be a middling defense this year. But all signs in the preseason were that that's not going to be the case. Then you've got the gunslinger in Joe Flacco with the Browns. He's thrown for 300-plus yards. I think it was 8 of his last 10 starts. I mean, that's absolutely insane numbers, right? He doesn't care anymore. He's just going to go out there and throw the ball around. And then, you got Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and all them. So that's an interesting one. Miami and Indianapolis in the Dome, where Miami's defense looks like it could be in shambles. Now, these things can surprise us as we get underway in a season, but looks like it could be in shambles. And then you got those explosive players on Miami in the Dome, and what should be a good offense with Indianapolis. We can keep in mind that Shane Steichen they were one play away from going to the playoffs 2 years ago with Gardner Minshew as their quarterback. They were 8-9 last year with Anthony Richardson unable to complete passes and the ghost of Joe Flacco playing quarterback. So that should be a good offense all the way around. Not super explosive, but good. And then there's the Lions and the Packers, which I kind of put in the category below, just because games in Green Bay kind of, I don't know how many people know this. They actually let the grass grow a little bit taller in Green Bay, slow down teams. And so we're less likely to get like a real shootout there, but it's also hard to see. I mean, the Lions implied team total is 22.5, which is insanely low. Like, it's hard to see either of those teams finishing below like 23, 24 points. And so, that's another game to think about. We got higher prices and to me, a lower likelihood of a true shootout. But yeah, that's certainly one that wouldn't surprise me if it ended up taking off.
Kind of spin off of that question and some of the macro stuff we were talking about before we get into quarterbacks. Are there any particularly fragile situations that are on your mind? Like, one that just comes to mind here is we've had a really weird offseason with Tyreek Hill. We were just talking about that game. They just said he wasn't named captain the other day. Seems like he's fully healthy, but if I had to put a word on it, the vibes have not been good. And it's kind of are we going to be just back to the normal Tyreek Hill? Because if we are, this price is insane, for him, is being priced at 6,700. How do you think about some of those situations? And maybe there's some other examples that are on your mind as well.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I don't know that I have others off the top of my head that I can pull out. But the way I try to think about them is, what do you win when you win? So if you're wrong, if you finish in the top 20%, you double your money or you increase your money by 80%. But over time, that really doesn't matter. You have to be thinking about first place. So realistically, if you're wrong to a middling score, that's almost as bad as being wrong to the downside. If you're wrong and Tyreek Hill gets 17 points, that's not substantially different from being wrong and Tyreek Hill getting 4 points. And so if you're right, then you've got a guy who's 6,700 and could score 30, 35 points. And so that's how I try to think about that is, if I'm right, what's the upside? Because if I'm wrong, it's kind of the same across the board. You're wrong. And yes, it feels a lot better to finish in the money than to finish outside the money. We all know that. But over time, that can't be our mindset. Our mindset has to be, how do we finish at the top of the leaderboards? And so somebody like Tyreek Hill, I'm willing to embrace that variance. It's funny you use that word vibes, because that's been, I've heard that so many places with regards to the Dolphins. The vibes are just off. It seems like this is set up to be a bad team. The vibes are off. And if that's the case, yeah, Tyreek Hill, of all people, is certainly going to feed into that. and just have another down season. But we don't know that until we know it, right? So that's a place where I'm willing to take the risk, because what do you when you win? You win a lot if Tyreek Hill hits. What do you lose? The same as if you're wrong on anything else.
Yep. Let's dive into quarterbacks. I mean, really interesting slate in that all of the other elite quarterbacks are not on the main slate outside of Jayden Daniels. He is priced at the top there, 7,000. But when you look at the salaries, at least how I've been thinking about these elite quarterbacks in the best ball market and in some of these other places, he is not pulling away from these other quarterbacks salary wise. Joe Burrow, 6,900, Mayfield, 66, Goff, 6,500. Is Daniels a clear cut number one option for you, just like pure points projection, or are these guys as close as the salary indicates?
Yeah. One of the first things I did in that journal this week was broke down the quarterbacks available on the slate and which quarterbacks have rushing upside. And really, Jayden Daniels is at the top of the pile there. So I think the big question mark here in this game for Jayden Daniels is, how competitive do the Giants keep it? Do you need to bet on the Giants keeping it competitive in order to justify Jayden Daniels? Realistically, like what you're probably getting from Jayden Daniels in an expected game environment here with the Giants is something like 24 to 27, 28 DraftKings points, which at his salary is really solid. At his salary is not winning you a tournament. So I look at Jayden Daniels as a very solid way to go. You would ideally want to bet on this game being a shootout. We look at his games last year where he topped 30 points, 26 to 34 loss against Dallas, a 36 to 33 win, or 36 to 33 win against Philadelphia, a 30 to 24 win against Atlanta. And that sort of tracks with what you would expect from somebody who's having to put up 30 plus points, is a shootout type of game environment. So I don't look at him and just say, oh my gosh, what a smash play. In terms of raw points, he's got a pretty good shot at being the top raw point scorer on the slate. But always our most upside is going to come from shootouts where a team has to keep doing things in order to win that game. So if I'm playing Jayden Daniels, I ideally want to either play something from somebody from the Giants side, which they really have one core piece in Malik Nabers, or at least say, well, I don't think that Nabers has a monster game, but I am painting a picture of this game being competitive and saying that that's how Jayden Daniels ends up having a big game. Sort of in my mind, playing out that scenario of how does this game stay competitive? Is there anything from the Giants side I want on that roster? Because that's one of our biggest edges, is thinking beyond the player and into the game environment. Because then we can say, if this player has this big game, how did it happen? And therefore, who else benefits, or who else is likeliest to benefit, which allows us to then get 2 or 3 things right with one bet. If we're getting that Jayden Daniels bet right, we're probably getting those other things right already. So we just need to actually take advantage of that on our rosters. And, we say at OWS, like, where is it? Right there, right? Have a boat, will teach you to fish. Our whole thing is like, the DFS is not a game of picking players, right? It's a strategy game. It's a game of roster construction, and it's a game of outmaneuvering the field. And so we spend a lot of time talking about that. And again, really quickly, I'll just throw this out there. We always say, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, this dude does not resonate with me at all, I don't like him, I'm not going to watch this show the rest of the season, then the site's probably not for you, right? Like, we tailor the site to the people who it's a fit for, which is really cool, because a lot of times people come to the site and realize really quickly, okay, this site's not for me. There's like, my vibe is something different. Other people come to the site and they're like, oh, this is what I've been looking for in a DFS site, and they stick around. And so, check out the site, because everything's free week 1. We do that every year. But yeah, this is like what we want to be thinking about, is not just who can have a big game, but how do they have a big game? And then how do we really turn that math in our favor on our rosters?
Yeah, especially if he's going to be fairly popular, because the salary cap is pretty loose this week. And it's like, yeah, I want to play Jayden Daniels. This is a guy who could easily be 8,000, for the rest of the season and other matchups. So I can see people gravitating to him. We talked about some of those other game environments that interest you. I am assuming your kind of favorite quarterback plays are going to funnel down from those game environments. How do you kind of separate this next tier beyond Jayden Daniels? Because it is pretty, smushed up together salary wise. Yeah.
So again, it comes down to ceiling and what do we win when we win? So let's look at Bryce Young. Week 18 last year, a 44 to 38 win against Atlanta, knocked him out of playoff contention. 36.4 DraftKings points for Bryce Young in that one. Week 16, they beat Arizona 36 to 30, 27.1 DraftKings points. So we're looking at Jayden Daniels, and it's like, oh, you could get probably 24 to 27 points. And if everything goes really well and it's a shootout, 30 plus, Well, down here is Bryce Young in a really good game environment that should be competitive. 5,700, people aren't going to want to play him, and he's capable of those types of games. Michael Penix in this game against Tampa, obviously less rushing than Bryce Young, who's going to pick up those 2 or 3 points on the ground a lot of times. But somebody like that, somebody like Baker Mayfield, who had a bunch of games last year with high scores. And so, yeah, to me, it's going to be a lot of thinking about the game environments and where we can just load up on a potential back and forth type of shootout. And I think that we are well suited to finding some games like that on this week, just because of the way that these teams match. They give us exciting matchups in week 1. They take a lot of them off the main slate, but something like Tampa and Atlanta or something like Carolina and Jacksonville really gives us that opportunity for aggressive forward-leaning offenses to just trade blows back and forth throughout the game.
Yeah, I love the Bryce Young shout. I mean, I have a feeling he's going to go undervalued here, maybe because people are interested in the price tag on Teteroya McMillan, that he might get a little carryover love. But I like that a lot. Are there any other cheap guys? He's obviously 5,700. If people are doing builds where they're trying to jam in these more expensive wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, could you get to a Daniel Jones, at 5,100, or is that a little too cute for week 1?
Yeah, there's one cheap guy that we'll save for the building blocks.
Ooh, nice.
Daniel Jones is interesting because we know that he can run. We know that there's going to be a couple games throughout the season where he adds 7 or 8 points on the ground, maybe not even including a rushing touchdown. But his thing is that he doesn't throw the ball deep. And then the Colts don't really have any downfield weapons outside of Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell, who are just kind of like, they're not core pieces, right? They're like, let's take a few shots at them throughout the game type pieces. And so, I think that Daniel Jones is going to be an interesting guy to think about this season. I will definitely have some exposure to him in mass multi-entry, large field play. I'll be surprised if he makes it closer to my tighter builds, right? Which is kind of what we like to talk about here. Is we're not specifically just talking tighter builds, we're talking slate, but we try to kind of lean into who are our favorite plays on the slate. Not necessarily who are the best on paper plays on the slate, but like in terms of where the field is going to go, what people are thinking, what's going to make us the most money over time. I don't think I put Daniel Jones in that category, but also I'm going to have some exposure to him this week because I like the game environment. And he's the kind of guy who I think people don't really realize how much the Vikings wanted to keep Daniel Jones after he was there last year. The Vikings really liked him. And it's kind of similar to Sam Darnold being with the 49ers, or the 49ers really liked him, or Baker Mayfield going to the Rams for a little bit. These guys who can rehab their career, going to the right places and spending some time under the right people. So Daniel Jones should be able to run this offense pretty well for the Colts. The problem is that offense is going to be Jonathan Taylor centric and kind of a lot more short passes. So you kind of think more like 225 to 250 passing yards for Daniel Jones, 1 or 2 touchdowns, which nice point per dollar, but doesn't really make a difference in tournaments.
Any other QBs you want to hit on before we move on? And obviously, like you said, we're going to keep one in our back pocket for our DK lineup build at the end of the show.
Yeah, I'll throw just a quick mention toward Tua, just because he's so cheap and there's so many unknowns with Miami. So that question of what if, right? What if they have that big game? And then Brock Purdy, I think, is a guy who always goes overlooked in that Seattle-San Francisco game, low over-under 42.5 game in Seattle, missing the weapons. But it's never surprising when Brock Purdy puts up like 28, 29 DraftKings points. And so another guy worth at least dropping a mention in there on.
Yep. I like that. Let's move on to running backs here. We obviously have some elite bell cow backs at the top. A lot of these first and second round picks for those of us coming over from the best ball streets. Bijan Robinson, Gibbs, CMC priced pretty intriguingly here at 7,300. You got Bucky Irving and the rookie Genty, A-Chain, Jonathan Taylor up here. Seems like a choose your own adventure at running back, at least on the top end.
Yeah, I mean, CMC to me is in a different class just because we have such a history of him being a focal point in this offense. And then if, you get rid of Debo, Brandon Ayuk's not ready. We still don't know what's going on with Juwan Jennings. Well, who does the offense funnel through? It's going to be Christian McCaffrey. And so I think that people are going to be like almost surprised coming out of Sunday if Christian McCaffrey has 8 catches and 20 carries, but it's like, isn't that what they do with him when he's healthy? All signs point to him being healthy. So he kind of stands out in a different category to me. Then you got, I'd say, Gibbs next and Bijan Robinson right behind him as sort of the next guys up here at the top that I would feel most confident in terms of what are their chances of hitting a ceiling outcome. Because at these price tags, you really want 30 plus points, and you want that outside shot at 35 to 40. And so both these guys, just in terms of their ball and their hands ability, can get there. And then we get down to kind of the next tier, which I'd be less interested in, which is, or less likely to go out of my way to go overweight on these guys, which is Bucky Irving, Devon Achane, Ashton Genty, where it's just harder for me to see these guys having the 30 plus point game. And yeah, you're saving a little bit in salary, but not a significant amount, not a significant enough amount for me to justify going to these guys over some of the guys above them.
Yeah, for sure. And especially, I mean, there's still some, intriguing, touch splits that I want to see with the Bucks backfield. I love Bucky as a talent. I still think Rachaad White's going to be heavily involved. I like Genty. Would it surprise anybody if Pete Carroll's giving Raheem Mostert a decent amount of touches week one? It wouldn't necessarily surprise me. If you are looking to save a little bit of money at running back, where are we looking? Like the James Conner, Tony Pollard types?
Yeah, so I want to toss Breece Hall out there, and I'm like a Breece Hall hater since early in his career. I've made a lot of money by not playing Breece Hall on weeks where he's really popular and posts duds. I've lost a lot of money from not playing Breece Hall in the weeks when he hits. But Breece Hall is like, he's still a good player. He's only 6,400. And I think with the low over-under in this game, all the question marks around this offense, what it's going to look like, people are just going to skip over him. So I don't think he's a super sharp play in terms of like who are the top running back plays on the slate. But if we look at it and isolate it in terms of where's the field going to go and who's going overlooked and has ceiling, he certainly would make you money over time. Another guy in this range that I'm often preach against is Alvin Kamara, but people are so down on the Saints offense. You've got Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, both under 5,200. You've got Alvin Kamara at 6,300. I think people are so down on this offense that players on this offense are kind of invisible to them. And I do think that Alvin Kamara has lost a step. I think deeper into the season, that might be a concern, but it's week one, right? This is where guys like this tend to still perform well. You look at Cooper Kupp putting up 35 points in week one last year before tailing off. Amari Cooper put up 27 points in, I think it was week 1 or 2 last year. And then he was with the Bills and couldn't even get on the field. Right. And so Alvin Kamara is going to be fresh. And I think that he's a guy to think about. And then, James Conner, Chuba Hubbard, these guys who are like not sexy, but you know that they're going to get a decent workload. I know that Trey Benson's going to eat in a little bit to James Conner's workload. I know that Rico Dowdle's going to eat in a little bit to Chuba Hubbard's workload. But early in the season, I still expect both these guys to have pretty sizable, significant roles, 65% plus in their offense. And so, they're not exciting. And because of that, they actually end up being sharp plays because they can put up 16, 17, 18 points, even in kind of a lower end game with that upside for like a 26, 28, 30, 32 point game.
Are there any kind of real cheap guys that you'd entertain? Obviously takes a bit of a leap of faith. I think we could say like sub 5,500, maybe J.K. Dobbins on one of the biggest favorites of the slate with Denver at home. People are so excited about Trevion Henderson after his preseason. Is there anything else here, or is this kind of, hey, you're sacrificing too much with these plays?
No, I think it won't surprise me if Trevion Henderson puts up 20 DraftKings points. It won't surprise me if Ramondre Stevenson puts up 20 DraftKings points. I think that on this particular week, you compare these guys to wide receivers priced in the same range. There's probably going to be some wide receivers sub 6K who outscore these sub 6K running backs. And so you have to think about that. But I do think those guys are interesting. And then to me, personally, I've been talking about Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt since early August. I don't think that the Commanders traded Brian Robinson because they suddenly fell in love with Chris Rodriguez. I think Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is the running back for this offense. And and they've been raving about him since summer. The most frequent comp for him is LaShawn McCoy. And it's, great vision, really violent, sudden cuts, can make his body small through the hole, can get big in the secondary, running guys over. So it won't surprise me if Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is 5,200 by week 2. The problem is that could come from like him having a big enough role, but still only putting up 8 or 9 DraftKings points because he's not going to catch a lot of passes. And so he could have 70 rushing yards and 1 catch for 0 yards. He puts up 8 DraftKings points. DraftKings is like, oh, he's got a bigger role. We got to bump up his price. We never actually get to benefit. But I do think that he's fundamentally underpriced right now for what I expect his role to be.
Yeah. And I feel like, maybe, I don't know if you'd agree with this characterization. I think like in thinking back to last year, I feel like at the running back position in general, it was playing it more down the middle of like, hey, let's get these guys with monster ceilings. Yeah, you sometimes have to pay up for it a little bit more. Even like at the time, it was the Kyron Williams, obviously CMC. And it's like we're getting a little bit more creative with the quarterback plays, the wide receivers, the tight ends. But with the running backs, it is the position where it's easiest to project the volume. And that kind of follows through, I feel like, often with kind of your recommendations.
Yeah. I mean, it's the place where you want to take on the least amount of risk, generally speaking. And so Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, like on my game changer roster, which is, I don't even know how many entries it is this week, but usually that's about 300 entries and 1K or 1,500 entry fee. Like I'm probably not playing him on that roster because that's not the risk I need to take there. But in the slant where it's a $9 entry fee and you're trying to beat 20,000 rosters, I'll probably have 10% Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in that tournament because now we're able to save salary there. We're able to do something differently. If he ends up putting up a 20 to 25 point game, we've got a nice big edge on the field. And then I've still got plenty of rosters to do something differently. And so, and I think that's one of the things too, one of a couple of years ago, right? I was high on Puka Nacua as a rookie all throughout August. I'm working my own bubble, right? So I'm just assuming everybody's seeing what I'm seeing. I'm assuming people are getting high on Puka Nacua. I literally built my roster Saturday night, week 1, and had 15% Puka Nacua. I had him on my main roster in the game changer. And then I look at ownership for the first time and he's projected at sub 0.5%. And it was like, oh, whoa, what am I doing? Like I'm going way too overboard on this guy. Like maybe I'm seeing things wrong. And I dialed things back down to like sub 3%. I took him off my main roster and it cost me well over $100,000 that week, right? Where it was like, oh yeah, I can say, yeah, I got Puka at 6x ownership and got this monster score at 3K. Nobody was on this guy, but like, who cares if you're not actually following through with what you're seeing? And so it is worthwhile to take the risk on week 1 sometimes when you see something and just say, look, like maybe it doesn't work out, but that's how you make money over time is taking these risks, especially early where there's less information, and less information can be more powerful for us. So we kind of learn our lessons from mistakes we make in the past. We strive to not make those mistakes again. And then we can make other mistakes and learn from those ones as well.
Yep. I love that motto. Let's bump over to wide receiver here. We mentioned some of these guys at the top, Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, Amon-Ra. You mentioned also liking some of the guys in that 5 to 6K range who people are going to maybe be deciding, in the flex, do I go running back? Do I go wide receiver? What's kind of your bird's eye view of the wide receivers?
Yeah, I think we're going to see some overpay or some over rostering up at the top. Like let's take Jamar Chase. I laid this out in my journal. I was trying to find it real quickly, but it was all of his games last year where he scored 30 plus points. 3 of those 4 games were shootouts. So if you're playing Jamar Chase as a one-off at 8,100, in my opinion, you're doing it wrong. You are playing him opposite Browns who have cheap pieces and saying Jamar Chase posts a score that wins you a tournament because it's a huge chunk of your salary. You're expecting him to get a score that wins you a tournament without the Browns doing anything in response, which is pretty unlikely, right? And so I think we're going to see people just saying, oh, there's salary to save. It's a pricing psychology thing, right? Where it's like there's salary to save. These are the most expensive players. Therefore, these are the guys worth paying up for. Puka Nacua topped 28.3 DraftKings points once last year. It was in a 44 to 42 game against the Bills. And so I think that we're going to see people going up to Jamar Chase, Puka Nacua, because they're those 2 highest priced guys, and maybe not saying like, are these actually the best places to go? Yes, I'm saving salary, but maybe there's some other guys that I can go a little bit lower than that. So I think that's going to be one of the edges this week. I really like this like sub 7K range where Brian Thomas Jr. can put up the top score on the slate. Tyreek Hill can put up the top score on the slate. Mike Evans can put up the top score on the slate. I'll even say in this game environment that Drake London can put up the top score on the slate. Drake London, the guy who falls into that Michael Pittman or Stephon Diggs or Devontae Adams category where you need the volume in order for him to pay off. But this is the type of game environment. We've got question marks on Darnell Mooney's health still. And this is the type of game environment where I think that volume could pile up. So I think there's a lot of interesting guys in this range. I think that there's interesting guys in the sub 6K range where people are going to look at the rookies, but there's also guys like Deebo Samuel, Jamison Williams, who had a bunch of 25 plus point games last year. And everything has been rave reviews about him out of Lions camp this year. Marvin Harrison Jr., who, yeah, everybody's kind of burned by his rookie year last year, but there's this question of what if, right? What if he ends up putting up one of these 6 catches for 130 yards and 2 touchdown type games? Cooper Kupp, who I actually don't think is completely dead, and I think is going to have some really big games for the Seahawks. So I think that this sub 6K range also has some really interesting value. And then of course, we get down in the low 5Ks and then like sub 5K where more question marks, but certainly some interesting options. We already mentioned Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. I also want to highlight here, like we can get so contrarian conscious that we just, anybody who's going to be popular, we're like, well, that's a bad play. Emeka Egbuka at 4,600 with Chris Godwin out on an offense that we know focuses on their top weapons. To me, Emeka Egbuka is going to just be a really sharp play. You could justify playing him on 100% of rosters and like it would be plus EV. It doesn't mean he's going to hit this week, but it's just like, yeah, he's going to be. I'll spin it back to a couple years ago. Dave Canales, when he was with the Bucks, he was asked about Cade Otton's. We've told the story on here before, but he was asked about Cade Otton's development, and he was raving about how great Cade Otton was doing, and then he interrupted himself to say, "Look, you don't design plays for Cade Otton. You design plays for Mike Evans. You design plays for Chris Godwin. If those guys aren't open, then you find the next guy, right?" This offseason, Baker Mayfield joked that the Bucks offense is get the ball to Mike Evans, right? Like that's the mindset on this team is who are our top weapons? Let's get the ball to them. And so Mike Evans is the number one weapon there with no Chris Godwin. And then the number two weapon is going to be Emeka Egbuka. So to me, yeah, Jalen McMillan out, Chris Godwin expected to be out. So Emeka Egbuka, I think, is a really sharp play down here, sub 5K.
Do you think at all about, obviously the profiles of these guys and what they bring to the table are different? You mentioned a guy like Michael Pittman Jr. The selling point is he's going to earn targets. He might not be a big yards after catch, explosive play guy, but you feel good about that. Then you talk about a guy like Jameson Williams, where it's like, okay, maybe he's not going to see 10 plus targets, but what he can do with 5 or 6 of those. Do you have kind of, if you're paying in this 5K range, would you rather gravitate to a guy like JSN, who again, I think is going to project for a decent amount of targets versus taking the shot on these more, boom bust guys who need the big play to pay off their salary?
It's funny. I remember like 15, 18 years ago, I was just playing season long fantasy football. And it was like back when like targets was a new stat. And that was pretty innovative. Like, oh, how many times is this guy thrown to? And I remember thinking like I wish there was a way to just see like how all these wide receivers are used, because that seems like a pretty valuable thing to understand beyond just what are their stats. And so it's funny to fast forward, a decade and a half, and it's like, that's my life now, is knowing how these guys are used. And that's a huge part of what we talk about on the site is when we're breaking down games and the slate and whatnot, but also a huge part of understanding how to build a roster is what are these guys' roles and how are they used? So again, every week's different. I think as we get deeper into the season and salary gets tighter, there starts to be this component of like, oh, you might only need 180 points to win a DraftKings tournament, like a mid-sized DraftKings tournament this week. Then these guys in the 5K range who you've got guys who might see 3 to 7 targets, mostly downfield, and most weeks they're not going to hit. And then you've got the guy who's going to see like the slot receiver who's going to see 7 to 9 targets, like a Josh Downs. You're going to see a bunch of targets. He has upside with the ball in his hands, and he's not going to hurt you most weeks. Well, as we get deeper into the season, that second type of guy, the Josh Downs guy, starts to become more and more valuable because there's the guys who are hitting more frequently, their price has been driven up. So now you got the guys in the high 4Ks, the low to mid 5Ks, who are really kind of dart throws, and there's only 3 or 4 of them. So if you've got 3 or 4 guys who all have like a 5% chance of hitting, most weeks, none of them are going to hit. And so therefore, just taking the safe guy who also has a 5% chance of hitting is more valuable. But when we're at this point early in the season, I'm way less likely to go to a Josh Downs or say a Michael Pittman outside of game environment where it's like, oh, I think this game's back and forth. I think the Colts are having to throw the ball a bunch. I think the volume's piling up on these guys, and I'm going to bet on that story. Yeah, then I'll do that. But in terms of just isolated one-offs, I'm less like, I'm going to need to go back and listen to this podcast too later in the week when I start building rosters to remember what I've said about how I want to construct things this week. But yeah, like early in the season, it's more about like, oh, there's some underpriced guys who can hit for 25 to 30. And those are the guys I want to go to. Chris Olave can go for 25 to 30. I don't like Spencer Rattler as a quarterback. Nobody does, but he can go for 25 to 30. Jameson Williams can obviously go for 25 to 30. Deebo Samuel has got a low floor, but he can go for 25 to 30. Like those are the types of guys I want to gravitate toward in week 1 because their prices have not been bumped up yet. And later in the season, they are going to be bumped up.
I like that. Any other wide receivers you want to shout out here? Obviously, it's just such a big pool
Yeah,
of
it's
players.
it's a
If
huge
there's anyone.
pool. It's week one. There's so much that you can get into, but yeah, I mean, I think that I guess I'll highlight Xavier Legette just really quickly, just as a guy who reports out of like everything's kind of muted in terms of these types of reports at this time of year, but reports out of camp was like he was dealing with a lot last year, physically and personally, and that they expect him to be a very different player this year. So he's one that it won't surprise me if we see, they really don't have a number 3 receiver now because Jalen Coker is going to be out week one. And so we've brought back, did they bring back Hunter Renfrow? Is that what they did? So yeah, it's like, we don't have like a real number 3 wide receiver. I think that Xavier Legette could be somebody who has a nice game, if not here, then at some point in this season. But yeah, other than that, we kind of get down deeper and deeper into dart throws below the guys that we've already talked about.
Yep. Let's hit on tight end. The theme last year was whenever I would get us to tight ends, you would almost groan having to talk about the position. Maybe you can muster a little more enthusiasm here. Week one, we obviously have the 3 big guys at the top: Bowers, McBride, Kittle. My just gut is that they're going to go pretty overlooked just because people would rather spend their money at the other positions. I might be wrong on that, but curious how you are seeing the tight end position.
Well, yeah, the thing about the tight end position is everybody has to play one. And so the value when you get like a 25-point score is pretty dramatic because most weeks only one tight end is going to put up a score like that. And then you're getting a big gap to everybody else. So it would be kind of like if you played Jaden Daniels and he got 28, but all the other quarterbacks got 12 to 15, right? Like all of a sudden that's a huge separator. And people don't really think of the tight end position that way. So on a slate like this, where you have Bowers, you have McBride, you have Kittle, like I want to be thinking, okay, it's probable that one of those guys scores 20 plus. And so if I'm going down cheap, I don't want to go cheap on like the deeper in the season type thought process dart throw where you're like, hey, maybe Hunter Henry has the good game, or maybe Jatavian Sanders has a nice game. Maybe Tucker Kraft hits for a big play. The larger the tournament field you get into, the more willing I would be to embrace that. But in smaller field contests, I'm going to be thinking a little bit more about like, where do I get points here? Because I do think some of my competition is going to be getting solid points from the tight end position. It's been a long time that we've played Kittle whenever Debo's out or Ayuk's out because they have to lean on him more in the pass game. The unique thing about Kittle, one of the best pass catching tight ends ever, but one of the best blocking tight ends ever as well. And so when they have their other pass catching weapons, they use him as a blocker a lot more. That won't be the case this week. Trey McBride, obviously a central focal point for that offense. Brock Bowers, a central focal point for that offense. So yeah, I do think that thinking about our ceiling on tight ends is going to be important, but that doesn't mean that there aren't cheap guys who can get you ceiling. Like Kyle Pitts, everybody still hates on him, but there's still like those big games are still in there as a possibility. I mentioned Hunter Henry as sort of this dart throw, but the larger the tournament field you get into, the more viable it is to go to that type of dart throw. Same thing for a Tucker Kraft or a Mike Gesicki, Chiga Okonkwo, Brenton Strain. So yeah, like there are guys down here who have potential to produce. It just gets thinner and thinner the farther down you go.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite of the 3 up top? Obviously a bit of a spread, from Bowers to Kittle as far as $700, but if you had to choose.
I think McBride is my favorite of the ones up top because I think of this, the Patriots and like, think about how Pete Carroll likes to win games, keep the ball on the ground, play for the fourth quarter, keep the ball in front of you on defense. Think about how Mike Vrabel likes to win games. It's like, it's a chess match. It's about controlling things and trying to have that advantage heading into the fourth quarter. And so you don't see a pair of teams that are likely to be super aggressive throughout the game so much as kind of body blows, taking a few swings of haymakers, but for the most part, body blows and trying to set things up to have advantage going into the fourth quarter. So harder to see Bowers just having the monster game, but he obviously can. And then Kittle, I just sort of am gravitating more toward CMC on that team, which is pushing me like more toward non-Kittle rosters. I'll have plenty of Kittle rosters, but I think McBride kind of stands out as the top to me out of those 3.
Is this a kind of slate where you could see yourself including the tight end with your quarterback as just a way to correlate? Like you mentioned Bryce Young, like would you toss on a Jatavian Sanders as part of that, just trying to save money and get less things right?
Funny you should mention that because we're almost to the building blocks, the roster build, which we will have one of those. But yeah, that's one of the ways to play cheap tight end. One of the clearest ways to play cheap tight end is to just say, all right, I'm going to take Bryce Young plus Xavier Legette, and then also say, well, what if another touchdown goes to the tight end? And then you throw in Jatavian Sanders into a roster like that, or Brenton Strange for the Jags, and say, hey, maybe the touchdown goes here. And so you try to get more things right by just pairing that tight end with your quarterback and hoping the touchdowns fall that way. So yeah, this is definitely a week where that would be in play for me, depending on the quarterback and depending on the construction of the rest of my roster. But I also don't, like, it's pretty common to just sort of leave tight end till last when building a roster. And I want to make sure I'm not doing that this week, because I do think there are edges at the tight end position. And I want to have some rosters where I think, okay, let me prioritize this tight end or this type of structure or setup, and then kind of figure out things from there.
All right. Well, with enough teases here, I do think it's time to build our lineup. I want to mention a couple other housekeeping things, though, before we do. Like JM said, this week, 1 week season, completely free. So you just go sign up, your email, create an account if you haven't yet. Everything on the site, including all of the stuff JMToWin has been talking about, the scroll, those Sunday updates, go just test drive it. This is the perfect opportunity to see if the site's for you. JM often says, hey, the site's not for everyone. You don't have to pay to find out. This is a preview. And then if you do like it, then you can come back next week and we can start getting you hooked up with the promo code Pete's and all that good stuff. But take advantage of the free preview. Also, this show is airing early this week because I'm traveling later this week. But going forward, this show will regularly be live streamed Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern as the lights in my office go out, because I'm recording at a different time than I'm used to here. So you guys can look forward to that. Like I said, it's going to be an extra long block of shows.
Wait, do you have those lights on automatic timers?
Yeah, I'm normally up. We're recording this peeling behind the curtain at 5 p.m. And then that way I don't have to worry about it being off. So there you go. But yeah, so this show will regularly be about a 2-hour plus block of shows with Jam, and then we'll roll into Bully the Sims with the in-game syndicate crew and Youdacao and all of that. So those are the housekeeping things. Without further ado, since I didn't get to play it at the beginning without the cold open, it is time for the building blocks intro. All right, JM, it is time. Everybody's favorite portion of the show. We are going to build a lineup here on DraftKings. You've maybe teased a couple of these plays or alluded to them. Where are we starting this block?
Okay, so real quick background on these blocks. So one of the sharpest ways to approach DFS is to just think about things in terms of the block of points that you're trying to get. So this all started for me in Josh Allen's rookie year, where people, Josh Allen was kind of a joke when he was drafted. It was like, oh, you can't fix inaccuracy at the pro level. It's never happened before. And then he started out that rookie season really poorly, right? Drafted from Division II, number 7 overall, and nobody watched Bills games back then. And then he got hurt, and then there were like a lot of reports that while he was hurt, he and Brian Daboll worked really closely together and fixed some things, and they were feeling really great about Josh Allen coming back off that injury. And his first game back, he put up 30 DraftKings points. And then the next week, nobody rostered him, and he put up like 30 DraftKings points again. And I was like, man, I got to go watch these games. And watching the games, it was like, okay, Josh Allen's different. And this offense, Brian Daboll had been with the Patriots. He'd been with Alabama. Like, he had a good pedigree, but it was like, oh, this offense is really creative. It's really good. And the rest of that season, we just said, look, you can play. Josh Allen was like 5,500 to 5,300 to 5,500 in DraftKings salary. His wide receivers were like, rookie or second year Zay Jones and some other no-name guys, and they were all sub 4K. And it was like, you can basically just pay $1,300 for a block of players, and every single week you're going to get like 40 to 55 points for this $13K in salary spent. And I kept saying, like, one of these weeks it's going to blow up, right? And it ended up being the last week of the season against Miami. This block ended up combining for like 70-something points. And so it's this idea of like, if you isolate, instead of just isolating individual players, you isolate a block of players from an offense. So a couple of years ago, we had the Tennessee offense when it was Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill, and A.J. Brown. And there was 3 or 4 times in a season where they topped 100 combined points or topped 90 combined points. Then it was when Kupp was hurt, it was Puka and Kyron Williams. You could just combine them and get 60-plus points. They were both still underpriced. And so thinking about where the production on offense flows. So it's not always stacks. Sometimes it's quarterback and pass catcher. Sometimes it's just concentrated offense and good situations. But thinking about, I don't know which of these guys are going to get the points, but we just pay this block of salary. Okay, now, this week's block, let's think about this as one player who costs 9.6K in salary.
Okay.
9.6 hand salary. That's like Christian McCaffrey when he's healthy, right? So Christian McCaffrey when he's healthy, what scores are you hoping to get? So here are the last 6 games for this 9.6K player. You ready for this, Pete?
Yeah.
This is DraftKings scoring. I'll round up or down accordingly to make it simpler. 9.6 hand salary, 35 points, 48 points, 46 points, 52 points, 52 points, 21 points. That's insane production. That's 4x salary in 5 out of 6 games. That's like over 5x in 4 out of 6 games. That's almost 6x in 2 out of 6 games. This block is Joe Flacco and David Njoku. 2 years ago, with the same coach in the same offense, these are the combined scores of Flacco plus Njoku. Again, that's 35, 48, 46, 52, 52, and 21. And they cost 9.6 hand salary against one of the best offenses in football and one of the worst tight end defenses in football. It's just a great setup here. And like I was thinking about this morning. You could justify playing this on 150 rosters and just saying like, okay, if we played out the slate 100 times, it wouldn't hit all 100 times, but the hit rate would probably be high enough that it's plus EV to just say, all right, on this week, right? If you could look at 150 rosters, instead of looking at it as 150 separate rosters, if you look at it as just one tournament, one roster, hey!
Someone did get the memo that Dad's still recording. But you know what? This works out because I wanted you to make an appearance on my last best ball stream, and I forgot because you were taking a nap. So you want to say hi to everybody?
Yeah.
Hey, say hi.
Hi.
Say, what do you think about Joe Flacco and David Njoku? Are those good plays?
Yeah.
Tell JM, who's your favorite football player? Who plays? Who?
Ball player.
What about? I thought you always liked Deebo Samuel. Yeah,
That's a cool name. April, you don't remember this, but you and I hung out on the beach last fall, and my daughter tried to babysit you.
Here's the deal.
Down the stairs.
April, you're gonna run up and go see Mom because Dad's finishing his show. But I'm so glad that you came to say hi. Okay. All right. I love you. I love you. Hey, God, JM. I'm gonna pause this real quick. All right. Sorry about that, JM. April had to get her 10 minutes of fame here on the block party, but get us back to the Flacco Njoku splits.
Yeah, so I just think that like in terms of the setup here, that's what I was saying. If you think instead of thinking of like 150 rosters, if you think of it, I say this with best ball, right? You're drafting 150 rosters across 120 hours, and so you think of it as a bunch of different rosters and all that. But if you just think of it as one weekend of DraftKings tournaments, your mindset kind of shifts of like, yeah, you got to wait a whole year for this to play out. You got to spend a whole summer drafting, but still kind of treat it the same way you would one weekend of drafts and how you want to allocate things that way. Well, it's okay to pile in some risk into one spot. And so I'm not going to play Flacco and Njoku on 100% of my rosters, but I'll probably have them on 50 of my 150 rosters, like realistically, right? And like I had a week like that last year too. It was 2 years ago, I think, with Josh Allen, where it was like I played around with 100%. I ended up going like 75, and it was the game against the Eagles. He put up like 40 something DraftKings points. You know, you're like sometimes you just see these spots and it's like it would actually make sense. I'm not really going to go all in, but I am going to go deeper into this than I would in other spots. And just in terms of how they play, how Flacco's playing at this point in his career, how he meshes with Njoku, how this meshes with the matchup and game environment. I do think it's a really sharp setup this week.
And normally this is the point of the block where I ask you, would you like to do anything on the Cincinnati side, or with these prices, are you able to just play it from Cleveland alone?
Yeah, absolutely. With the prices on Cincinnati, you're able to play it through just Cleveland alone. You can tell the story. You can always want to like zoom out and think, okay, what's the story I'm telling here? How would this game play out? You can tell the story without a bring back from the other side being required. Now you could do a bring back, but I think it's going to be more unique not to. And so I will have some rosters with bring backs and then plenty of rosters without bring backs. You could add another pass catcher from the Browns in here. There was, of those 6 Flacco games with the Browns, there was one in which I think it was Elijah Moore and Njoku hit together. Maybe it was Amari who hit that game. There was a game where Amari went for 265 yards and a couple touchdowns with Joe Flacco. That was a game where Njoku didn't have as good of a game. So there's, you could flip this over and have some Jerry Jeudy, have some Cedric Tillman. But this is like my favorite pairing of the bunch down this pathway.
Awesome. All right, where do we go next? We get some running backs in here that are our favorites.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and to me, I think that taking some swings on like just really high upside running backs. So whether that's a Christian McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs. In fact, let's start with Christian McCaffrey and Jahmyr Gibbs, because we can always pivot down on one of these guys to a James Conner or Chuba Hubbard or one of these other guys you mentioned, with the upside in the 6K range. But I want to see what we could do, because you save so much in salary with this Flacco and Njoku pairing that you really have a nice setup from there. We can swing over to defense next just to get a sense of what our pricing looks like at this position. I think the Cardinals are going to be popular against Spencer Rattler. No real arguments against that. I think you could go with the Patriots at home. But one of the ones I want to throw in there in order to do something a little bit different is the Texans at 2,500. So they're on the road, but we know that road games in LA don't mean the same as they do in other spots. And we kind of look through their game logs last year, and we see, going into the playoffs, 24 points against the Chargers, 11 points against Tennessee, 15 against Miami, 19 against Tennessee, 19 against Dallas, 10 against Detroit, 10 against Indianapolis, 12 against New England, 9 against Green Bay. Like, some of these are good offenses that they're putting up big points against. One of the best secondaries in football, one of the best pass rushing duos in football, almost certainly a top 5 defense this year. And Stafford doesn't make a ton of mistakes, but I could see this being a spot where the Texans at 2,500 ends up being a nice way to go. Not one of my favorite defenses, but just wanted to throw something in there that could be a salary saver here as we build roster and talk through different things.
Yeah, and that gives us about 5,700 remaining. We still got the 3 wide receiver spots and a flex. Like you said, a ton of salary relief on this slate. Is this the point too, or do we throw in like an Igbuka and see how it works out?
Yeah. I was going to actually, Ibuka is perfect, because it's looking in this 4,600 range and saying what I would love to do next if building a roster, right? And I build a ton of rosters that don't all go into play, but just to get a feel for the slate, it's one of my favorite things to do to get a feel for the slate is build rosters. And the next thing I would do here is say, what's a cheap wide receiver? Because then you can start thinking about like, okay, we could really pile in some upside at our remaining wide receiver spots. So Ibuka at 4,600, we're doing enough differently. We don't have to worry about ownership on him. And we can throw him in here.
Yep, that gives us 6,100 for 3 spots. And again, on this slate, a lot to like still at those price points.
Yeah, and we're also on a slate where, as I already said, like we're not paying up for Chase even on this Flacco roster on this particular one. We would on some others, but we're not paying up for Puka on this roster. We've got the Texans defense. We're not paying up for Nico Collins on this roster. We've got the Texans defense. So we're telling a story of this lower scoring game or competitive game in that way. And so we're kind of getting down into like this sub 7K range anyway. And so what we start to see is we can probably fit in a couple guys in this 6K to 7K range, and then one more guy in the low 5K. So we'll see if it ends up working out price tag wise. But let's go ahead and let's do something different. Let's throw in Brian Thomas Jr. We could throw in Tyreek Hill as well, but just try to tap into these game environments that we like, a player who has a high ceiling. And then we've got, this might make salary a little tighter than we want it to be, because we'll get down to 5K. But we could throw in Drake London opposite our Emeka Ibuka and kind of play off of the game environment that we're betting on here. That would leave us with Travis Hunter. We already have Brian Thomas Jr., so we don't want that. That actually leaves us with a few interesting decisions here. So if I were building this roster, hand building, and I'm just building a bunch of practice rosters, I would probably play around with these last 3 or 4 spots a lot of different ways. But let's go ahead and take Brian Thomas Jr. out. And let's put in Tyreek Hill. And what that leaves us open to is one of 2 guys down here. We could swing over to Travis Hunter to go somebody, instead of Brian Thomas Jr., we're still betting on the same offense. Or this Chris Olave play, which again, a guy who realistically, if he's healthy and has a good quarterback, we're going to see him priced. Look at last year, 6,600, 64, 63, 65, 66, 66. Here he is down at 5,100 with nobody likely to be on him because of his situation, but people could be swinging too far in the wrong direction on that. So not that this is some official roster that we're all entering, but just some different ways that we could play around with this roster. Matthew Golden, another guy who could go in here. Yeah. Like I said, Travis Hunter. We've already got Drake London, so we don't need Darnell Mooney on this one. But just some fun stuff to think about in terms of how we can kind of round out these last roster spots. You see, like, okay, Christian McCaffrey can put up 40. Jahmyr Gibbs can put up 35 plus. Flacco plus Njoku can put up 50 plus. They've done it plenty of times before. Drake London and Emeka Ibuka in a game that goes the right direction could both put up 25 plus. Tyreek Hill can put up 35 plus. Chris Olave can put up 25 to 30. And Texans defense can put up double-digit points. So you kind of go through this roster and you ask, like, do we have the ceiling? Yeah, we do. And then in terms of floor, like, we know Christian McCaffrey's role is secure. Jahmyr Gibbs' role is secure. Question marks on Tyreek Hill, right? But if this game shoots out for Tampa and Atlanta, we know that Drake London and Ibuka's roles are secure. If Tyreek Hill is no longer the same, how cheap does his price get this year? 6,200, you know, like, we're still getting great value on him. So we feel good about the role that we're getting. Chris Olave is the one big question mark in terms of a lot of downside risk on this entire roster. And so this is the type of roster that you might tweak it a little bit in order to put in like a really small field contest, but mid-sized contest, you know, a few thousand entries and above, you'd feel tremendous about this roster, and it would play in large field play as well. And so, yeah, really interesting. You could play around with it a little bit more to get it to something that you really feel comfortable with in smaller field as well.
I can't help but do just one quick little follow-up, because he's been like the most controversial, hotly debated player the entire offseason. You mentioned Travis Hunter. It sounds like he is on the menu for you in week one. Obviously, everyone worried, you know, is he going to play some defense? Is he going to be a full-time player on offense? How do you think about him from a DraftKings perspective in week one?
Yeah, so it's interesting. You know, I listen to a ton of coaching press conferences. I listen to a ton of interviews. And the interesting thing about listening to those is you spend hours. I listen to them on 2x speed, and you spend hours listening to stuff to get like 4 or 5 actionable bits of information. But they're always actionable bits of information that other people don't have, and they can really swing things, right? So whether it's the way that Sean McVay was talking about Puka Nacua heading into his rookie year, or Mike McCarthy talking about wanting to run the ball more because that's how they want to win games, and then all of a sudden we start to see that play out. Like, these little things can make a big difference. So I was watching Brian Thomas Jr. on the Pivot, you know, the Ryan Clark and Fred Taylor, Channing Crowder.
I saw a clip from that, but I don't know if it's the one you're going to reference.
And they asked him about what is it like matching up with Travis Hunter in training camp. And he said, oh, I haven't matched up with Travis Hunter in training camp.
Ooh.
Well, if you're grooming Travis Hunter to be a key piece of your defense, you're going to be playing him against your number 1 wide receiver quite a bit, right? You're not going to be playing him against your number 2 offense in order to get him ready to go against NFL starters. So, like, those little things like that, I try to pay attention to them. They're not always actionable, but they usually are. And so that just kind of tells me that the way that they've been preparing Travis Hunter is for him to be a key piece of the offense, not a key piece of the defense early on. I'm sure that they're going to play him on both sides, but I do not think that he's going to be kind of a starting perimeter corner or a key piece of the defense early on, because he would certainly give him plenty of reps against your number 1 wideout if that were going to be the case.
Wow. I love that nugget. That is an actionable one there. So shout out to you for grinding all of these press conferences and interviews. Someone's got to do it, and it's not going to be me.
Always split, but yeah, I'm grinding these boring interviews and press conferences and whatnot, where a lot of coaches speak, but every once in a while you get something good out of it.
Beautiful. Well, like I said, go check out 1 Week Season, completely free for week one. Just sign up with your email and then dig in, and then you can see if it is the site for you. Regardless, JM and I are going to be here every single Friday going forward. It will be a 1 p.m. Eastern kickoff. But up next, we got the debut of our show, Bully the Sims with the In-Game Syndicate. JM, we will see you next week on Friday. All right, part 2 of the regular DFS show that I'm going to be running on the channel this season. You guys are, of course, familiar with JMToWin coming off of that. And then every Friday, this one is obviously pre-recorded, but every Friday immediately following that, I'm going to be joined by Youdacao and the guys from the In-Game Syndicate and Run the Sims. And we're going to continue the conversation about the slate, how we're thinking about certain situations, how to leverage the sim tools, balancing your portfolio, all of the things that we're going to be able to do within the Run the Sims suite of tools. And very excited to add this show. I think it's going to be a great addition. So Youda and Bric, you guys are no strangers to lulls, but our first time here on the DFS show. How are we doing?
Good. Thanks for having me. Ready to go week one?
I'm awful. There's commercials on Red Zone, Pete. Thinking of not watching your appearance this week and in protest of the commercials on Red Zone. Pretty upset.
I know. Everyone is upset. That's just how it goes. Youda, why don't we dive right into like what are kind of some of the things you think about with week one, where we obviously have the least amount of information that we're going to have as the season progresses. How does that dictate your play style and what you like to do, in comparison to later weeks?
I like to sort of read the room a lot as far as like what I'll like consume much more than I normally would, just to get an idea of like what like rookies people are excited about. People like the public does like to go in on like playing guys that they really like coming into the season, like the best ball guys they're high on, and a lot of the times those guys don't really realize that value till later, but they want to just like dive right in. So maybe like vetting, hype, stuff like that. Trying to get in on like the early sort of vet, like which is like saying the same thing on the other way, where like a lot of the points he scores is going to be front loaded. And then from there, it's kind of just like diagnosing what was real, what's sustainable. I'm not that caught up on NFL in general, so I don't have like my particular, I guess, like my own takes as far as like who I'm high on solidified, but I'm going to try to settle on those in the next few days.
Yeah, we're obviously recording this early, as I mentioned before. This will normally be Friday afternoon, so we'll have way more information. I think for this first week one, I want to do a little bit more macro, and we're going to pull up the tools here in a second as well, because I need a refresher. There's been a lot of new add-ons since the in-game syndicate took over, run the Sims. But Brian, what are you thinking about from a week one perspective? You've obviously over the years had to think about a new season, what it means for your model. What are the things you are looking to attack in week one?
I wonder what Yuda thinks about this idea. Week one is like the best week to kind of like not blanket fade, but just what if there's like a bunch of ownership going one direction, just not going that way. I think week one is like the best week to do that, because like I think the idea I see like on Twitter is make your guesses in week one on like who you think is going to be the plays. And, I don't have that level of expertise. I'm not sure a lot of people who think they do have that level of expertise at guessing actually who's going to pan out compared to the field. But in week one, at least, maybe week two, but definitely week one, just like if JCM comes in at like 18% own or something, just a complete fade because he's high owned and it's week one, I don't think is the worst strategy in the world.
Yeah, and we're going to see that. I mean, Youda mentioned it with some of these rookies, like, Emeka Egbuka is going to be one of the most owned players on the entire slate, has never played a game of football. A lot of those rookies as well. And I think every single year with best ball growing, that best ball brain that Yuda's talking about is like a more and more real phenomenon, where it's like we draft these guys at best ball because they peak late season 15 through 17. Like that's the selling point. If you map that on to week one DFS, that's probably going to be a losing strategy. So, Yuda, what other things are you thinking about, like coaching level dynamics, macro game environments? We obviously had last year all of the rise of the running backs kind of dominating things, pass rates going down. Are there any macro trends that are going to factor into how you think about the start of the season?
I mean, I can't predict the higher level NFL trends like that, but definitely the coaching changes and I guess like team turnover. I like focusing on like these positions that take a bit longer to sort of pan out, and like you actually need game reps to really get there. Like O-line changes or like O-line injuries, I think matter more early on, as opposed to something like defensive line, right? Changes there aren't going to be as impactful because you're kind of just telling those guys to like go. But like more dynamic shifts with like, if it's like O-line tight end shifting, I think that affects an offense much more than other positions early on.
So Brian, we talk a little bit about, and we'll pull up here on stream the Run the Sims tools and projections. How are the Run the Sims projections getting originated? I did hear about a call between Davis and Adam where they were arguing about Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt's market share, but how's the sausage getting made with the projections that are in the tool?
Well, so we have the base of what Justin built over the years. He has this monstrosity of a G sheet with all sorts of data and stuff and formulas, and we're in the process, especially Adam lately, of updating a lot of that the prior data. And then the idea behind this current iteration of the model is prior data, which is going to be fed by the season data and updated as we go. The more information we get, the more confident we'll be in the current numbers. And so we still need to go through quarterbacks. What I can't remember what else it was, Youda, and then getting that stuff dialed in at the team level too. All those priors need to be updated, and every piece affects the other piece. And then we bring in the game lines, pace information, and then that all feeds the play-by-play sim, which you could do play-by-play sims a bunch of different ways. The one this one is just like if it's a roll on run pass, which is also an adjustment the user can change, which I'll show in a second. But anyways, run pass, let's say it's a pass, then who does he throw to? Did the player catch it? How many yards was it for? Was it a touchdown? That sort of thing. You were going to say something, Pete?
Well, I was just going to say, and one thing that if people had messed around with Run the Sims previously, and this is a pretty big change here, is that you've always been able to fiddle with the individual market shares for player level data. If you want to say, hey, I think, Trey Benson's going to get more than James Conner here, let me tweak that. But now you can actually output that as updated projections. That's a new thing, correct?
He had that in there before.
Okay.
He had that in there before. But I'm pretty sure when you adjusted even before, it adjusted. But let's say you think it's wrong. Mm-hmm. For example, Kyler, you think Kyler's going to run more this year. You can adjust his market share and then rerun it, and it will update the projections. I don't have it run on this tab, this one, and it will change these projections. And you could download these projections, if you price your own props or something and use them in your own process, whatever. You could do that level of granularity, and you could also do it at the team level. If I don't know if it shows here, you could change the points scored or the pace or the rush rate or the rushing TD. One of the new things we did, I know me and you talked about this before we took over the company, is we added a normalize button, which I just did with Kyler, which is kind of like a way to adjust the ownership shares, because there's 100% of shares to go around rushing or receiving. And when you adjust something, so let's move Kyler back up to 25% here, it's above 100. And that obviously you can't rush more than 100%. This will normalize the rest of the players proportionally.
So Youda, as someone I know, when we've talked to you on Lulz, you've talked about, bullying and optimizer, having a bunch of rules, really getting it to work in the way you want. What are the things, because this normalized button actually provides some guardrails, right? Where before you might mess up over allocating a market share or whatever. What are some things people should know if they are trying to, bully the Sims here, bully the optimizer? Are there any things you've learned through trial and error over the years?
Specifically, since I hadn't used Sims, I was trying to bully an optimizer. And I guess it was actually to get the optimizer to perform more like a Sim. Because the optimizer is just going to want to jam projections every time within the constraints of whatever you constrain it to. So a lot of the times, if you just jam projections, it's going to build in one specific way. So I was actually only, I guess you would call bullying it, to provide more diversity and uniqueness in my own outputs. Otherwise, I'm going to have too much overlap, or I'm going to have some QB stack that's essentially a QB with like only 2 pass catchers rotating, and it would be like sometimes you'd be paired with like 100% of the wide receiver 1, which doesn't really reflect reality, where the wide receiver 3 might actually be the optimal like 20% of the time. So essentially, I was viewing it through the lens of QB stacks, and then if certain I guess iterations of the stack were coming in too low, I would prefer to like boost it with like some ancillary playmakers, or like the pass catching running back, that type of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then as far as Brian, if you want to show people, so they're familiar with this page and kind of adjusting the inputs here on the player level and the team level, but then we get into the settings here for the simulator itself. So let's say someone goes through, they make some of the tweaks that they'd like to make, and then they're ready to start making some teams. What are the things they should be thinking about on this settings page?
What contest are you entering? How many lineups are you competing against is a big one. And how much time do you have left? If you are an hour before game time, you got plenty of time. You could run as many simulations as you want. If there's last second news, you might not want to run every simulation. I think the max is about 4 or 5 minutes of compute time. So it's pretty fast either way, but just something to be aware of. The more this is just like an optimizer too that people are more familiar with. The more constraints you put on an optimizer, the longer it's going to take to compute. Sometimes it'll break it. Same thing with a sim, because it is still building lineups for you. What I like to do is we have these constraints here for like stacks. You can do team or game stacks, and salary ranges and stuff. I am not going to be using those, even though that kind of sounds crazy. It'll build enough. It'll build, because you're going to be making thousands and thousands of lineups anyways. It's going to build a whole bunch of stacks for you automatically. And then you could filter them later on the last page. So then you could filter by stacks if that's what you want. And you could filter by salary, or X players out, or change ownership, or which I could show in a second. Yeah. But that's when you're adjusting for your contest size, think of the contest structure too. That's the right side, the payout structure there. So like if you're in a milli maker, just make it the biggest size, top heavy. If you're in like 100-man winner take all or something, you'd go 100-man top heavy again. But if you're in like, I don't know, like the power, the whatever, like the 153 max or something, standard 3K, there's some flat ones, like the slant I think is kind of flat. I'd have to look at the payout structures, but just look at the payout structure and then adjust this right based on what you're actually entering.
Brian mentioned that he would kind of just let the system build it, and then find the stacks that the Sims likes that way. You mentioned, at least previously, that you kind of started with some of the stacks would be your starting point. Would you utilize the stacks here to start, or how would you go about that?
It would still be my own system dictating what the stacks were, but once it was determining that, I would basically look at if I was missing stacks that my own takes wanted, or from there it was like trying to get to what I hadn't created yet, and then vetting within the stacks, and then just really like making sure I was getting properly diversified from every primary stack.
Yeah, because I think that's a question a lot of people have, and it's been similar for me when I build lineups of like, do I just generate a ton of good lineups, that grade out well in the tool, and then kind of cherry pick the ones I like the most? Or do you go in with your preference and being like, I want to build the best possible Bo Nix lineups for this slate? Like that's the play I want to make.
That could very well be like your first Bo Nix team. But if you have 150 entries and 10 of them are Bo Nix, they have to have diversity within the Bo Nix filter.
Yeah. So they're not all just too similar. And that goes into where you're talking about, they wouldn't all be with Cortland Sutton. You'd have 20% with Marvin Mims or whatever, a variety that you thought the optimal rate was for the stacking.
Right. And that might actually be what the shady element of this can make easier for you too, where it might take away some of that work and have it in a way where it's accounting for like the correlation, but now it's actually like making sure that the diversity between your lineups is good. And so you're not necessarily jamming the top ROIs. You're getting that combination of ROI and not sort of cannibalizing your other 149.
Yep. Brian, could you do a little zoom on your browser here, and then you can tell people what we're seeing now that the lineups were generated?
Yeah, so I did it with this option of, and tell me if I'm too small or too big, Pete.
It's better.
I did the shady portfolio option, and you have to sub to that. So for people who don't know, Shady Vice DFS player, he's licensed out his code, his portfolio code, and Run the Sims is using it. So I enabled that, and it will then take the top 1,000 EV lineups. It depends on how many you build, and then build a portfolio based on how many you select. I selected 54, just totally random. If you do like a 3 max, just select 3, or 20 max, select 20, 150, select 150, and then it will do pretty much what you was just mentioning. It will diversify your risk and focus on like decannibalizing your lineups. And who would be a perfect person to have on, Pete, when he's a shady to explain this? Maybe we can get him on, because it's a little bit of a black box. We don't own the code. So if you have problems with it, make sure you tag Shady Advice. But it decannibalizes the lineups basically. So you're not eating your own EV. Like you could kind of think of I'm trying to think of I was watching this YouTuber, and he was talking about his MVP bets, like season long MVP bets, and he's like, I bet Caleb, I bet blah blah blah, I bet blah blah blah. It's like, homeboy, like these bets are kind of negatively correlated. There's only going to be one MVP. Like I know you like.
The big idea is when you interpret EV, that's just the EV of that one team in a vacuum, not really evaluating a portfolio. So if you're having all these entries, you really want to maximize portfolio EV rather than summing up like your individual lineup EV.
And if you think about like the progression of like DFS tools or things people are interested in or have used. So like you mentioned the optimizer thing, right? It's just going to jam the best plays. There's going to be a ton of duplicated players, combos, etc. if you just generate a 150 off the same projection set. Then there's the next level, which we kind of got to last year, right? With the sim tools, where they are grading those via whatever measures of the different tools are using, but you're still going to get a lot of replicated plays over and over in the top. Like if a site's projections are extra bullish on a specific scenario, that's going to be reflected in how those lineups are grading. And this is kind of like that next frontier of saying, now let's look at all of it and actually make a portfolio that makes sense for you. Because even if you took the top 150 lineups from a sim tool, you're probably, like you guys said, cannibalizing yourself. So this is helping you make those decisions that you otherwise would have, I guess, manually just had to eyeball and be like, I want one Bo Nix with Sutton and I want one Bo Nix with Marvin Mims. This tool essentially does that for you. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, you could think about like juxtapose it to an optimizer, Pete. Like
and Brian, to be clear, people can also upload their own projections and ownership and generate fields based on that ownership, correct? Like normalized ownership projections?
Yeah, we're going to have that. I don't know if it all that's going to be ready for week 1. I have to double check with our coder, but you can upload. You see this upload projections tab.
We can definitely upload. People can definitely upload their own projections, and I think what we're working on is like custom fields based on your ownership that gets normalized, and I think also more dynamic fields in general that reflect reality rather than just like making a field that gets to the ownership that's projected.
Yeah. So that
exactly.
And so then there ends up being like lots of different use cases. If you created, like, say you had your own process and you made your 150 lineups, or let's say you were going to even just play a 20 max and you made 100 lineups, could you upload those lineups to the portfolio diversity tool and then say, give me the best 20 to put in my 20 max in?
Yeah, ideally you would have to make more than 20 to land on 20. Otherwise there's nothing to sort through.
Right. So yeah, in this case, you make 200 lineups and it'll get you the top 20.
In theory, actually, the more you give it and the fewer you want, actually, you end up on a better set.
Yeah. Have there, from
Just
you guys,
to clarify, Pete,
yeah.
if you're talking about bringing in lineups, like if you make
Yeah.
them in Fantasy Cruncher or something and then bring
Yeah.
them in, if that's what you're talking about. That's not going to be optional for week 1, but eventually
Okay.
we're going to have where you could bring in and then click a button, because to feed his code, we need to run it all on our sims and then get all that sim data and send it to him. And then he does some math and then sends it back. So
Gotcha.
that won't be ready for week 1 because we got bigger problems.
Yeah. Not problems, Brian. What are they called? Happy accidents or whatever. I will say 10% off, promo code Pete. All these run the Sims tools. Brian, there's some separate levels of the subscription, including if you want the portfolio diversity tool, correct?
Yeah, it's $25 if you just want the projections and Sim 5 lineups in the optimizer. $200 if you want the full Sim, and $300 with Shady.
There you go. And let's see here. Let's go look, Brian, at some of those lineups generated, and we get the number next to them. I believe that's showing the EV. But how should people be thinking about what these numbers mean? You have the EV, which is just going to rank the lineups themselves, but then there's the top 0.1 percentile number. Is that what it's ultimately kind of sorted by?
Yeah, so this is we still have some bugs. Speaking of happy accidents, so this is one column over. I don't know why. So the column needs to be moved, but it is the EV, the top 1%, the in the money, and the top 0.1% scores. But the main important one is EV, and then if you're using Shady's portfolio diversifier, checking out what his rankings are. And you can see it's working based on it's not ranked by EV. So like this lineup here is lower than this one, but he has it ranked higher. And so it'll have some weird ones in here. Like that you wouldn't think, like a top like 25% lineup that probably wouldn't make your top 50 normally. But it's making it in his portfolio diversifier.
Yeah. And in theory, if you were to only generate that you wanted to use 10 lineups, the first 10 lineups would no longer be the same if you wanted 10 rather than 55 or whatever.
Because it now has bigger considerations to factor in of how to make those 10 lineups in conjunction with each other. Where if you give it an extra 40, then there's more to play with essentially, which could open up other lineups making more sense.
Yeah.
So, and then how would you guys use this from here? Obviously, you could just take the top 20, per your suggestion and move on. If there were things that you were like, okay, I'd actually really like, a Travis Hunter on one of these, and I don't see he's represented in there. How would you then kind of go back and say, like, I actually want to make sure that one of these is included in my set?
You could just select Travis Hunter from here. And then there will be I was calling it a lock button, but you just wants us to change it to a select button. So you could select those lineups specifically if you want.
And so this is actually a good example where we were using that top 20 threshold before we were looking for. This is the 26. So you're acknowledging like, hey, this isn't maybe the perfect lineup base for a 20 set, but if you wanted Travis Hunter, you go 6 down, and this would be the best available Hunter lineup. Is that how you guys would think about it?
Yeah, but if you really were high on him and you wanted him just be more mixed in, you would just change the projection.
Yep. So that's where it really all goes back to, like, if you're not getting enough of a player you want, it's because the projection is just saying, we can't make this work for you with the math that we have. You're going to need to boost this math to get more of this player.
Yeah. I think we should have a market share for him for running, huh? Like a little, maybe might get a ball. You never know. But yeah, exactly, Pete. Yeah. And go in there and change that and then rerun it. But that filter option that I was talking about, like why I personally won't, if I get like running your stacks and stuff perfectly and everything you want here, your salary, that's fine as long as you have time. I'm saying so. Right. Like But I really don't think there's anything wrong with making thousands of lineups and then running it and then coming in here and just filter. You could filter again here, right? You could filter your stacks, what it can contain, and then it just gets players you don't want, and then it just filters them straight out of this. And as long as you're making enough lineups, it's gonna be so much faster. But if you have time, you could do it in the beginning too.
Do you guys have, I know that the portfolio diversity thing's obviously new, and especially for NFL. Have there been any kind of trends or any interesting things you noticed that it does? Like, I'm just wondering, like, say if you have two wide receivers on the same team who project for a similar market share, let's say like a Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, is it like balancing your exposures to those?
It's going to, just looking at it, look at number 3 and 4. It's allowing 2 QBs back to back, or 4 to 5, but it's pretty diverse within as far as like who it's coming with. If you keep, I don't know who's the utility in those teams.
Yeah, Brian, can you tab over to flex?
I'm going. There we
go. The flex. Yeah,
it's
going Myers Bowers, and the first one it's going, I guess, the triple stack. But then it's like everyone else also is different, like the other positions.
Right. So it's saying you're making, in this example, you're making your big stand on the Geno stack, but we are going to cycle in a completely different set of other, stud players that you're putting around those.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have, again, kind of going back to the stack thing, because I know a lot of people will often either think through their lineups through the stack angle, or they'll have their core plays of like, I just want to play James Conner and I want to lock button George Kittle at tight end. Do you have any thoughts on like approaching it from one angle or the other from that perspective?
Yeah, it's always going to be a mix, because you're not, no player is actually just using whatever default settings that the sim is providing them. You're always going to come up with your own takes. So naturally, I think like we mentioned, it's just going to come in the form of changing projections or like lowering the ownership. That's sort of what the personal take is these days.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Brett, I wanted to, we hit on the normalizing the projection. Are there any other bells and whistles in here, whether with the inputs? What's that smart adjust there?
It proportionally adjusts. So this was actually Justin's idea, because I was telling him some of the updates we were doing. He was always annoyed that when you change market share, you probably should change the player's TD share, because they're getting the ball more. So they're probably slightly getting it more. So this kind of just automatically does it for you. So like just so you enable it, and then it'll work on all the teams. So like we'll just switch him to 10%, and then it automatically adjusts the TD share for you. And then you can normalize again, and then it adjusts all his teammates.
Yeah. Youda, how do you think about it philosophically of like, say there's someone, they feel very strongly about one situation, maybe it's one backfield here, this James Conner, Trey Benson. Hey, I think Trey Benson's going to have more of a workload. Or is it fine to use this tool of like, I'm just going to go micromanage this one thing and then just trust the defaults everywhere else? Or is there an element of like, you should be willing to dive into and press your finger on the lever of all these other situations?
I wouldn't recommend doing something like that unless it's like the most important decision on the entire slate. Because it's relatively, you don't want to take so large of a stand on something that's not that impactful. Like when you're right, you still might not win the slate. But like if your stand is like happens to be on like the highest owned team or like the highest particular consensus plays, then it could be worth it just sending it all in on that if that's really what you feel the best about.
Yep. Yeah, and it does get, it's both fun to tweak those, and it definitely takes a lot of conviction that you know better here. And Brian, I think I might have asked at the top how the projections are getting made, but these market share stuff, this all comes from the base level inputs that Justin initially laid the groundwork for doing these.
Yeah, and then we update all the priors, and then we're going to go through individually, and these guys are all going to argue over what they should be.
Cool. And so then by what, like the end of the week or something, they'll constantly be updated, but as the week progresses, they'll get more and more
Yeah,
tight.
relatively, I would say we're significantly behind where we would normally be, just because we're still piecing everything together. The tool itself is probably going to improve significantly over the course of the season too. I think we talked about adding like an overview page where you could easily see what your exposures are, because we don't even have that at this moment. Like that's very good for organizational purposes. Like I think as soon as we have that, I'm gonna like be much more reliant on this than like an optimizer. But right now, my process is gonna be like optimizer, then cross-check with this stuff. But yeah, I think we have plenty of add-ons in the works, and this being our first NFL season, it's like we brought on Davis. This is our first time that any of us is like ever talking NFL on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
It's sort of like if you were to get in now, you're kind of just gonna grow along with like our own process.
Yeah, I think that'll be cool. And that's also what this show is going to be as well. And, you know, in future shows, we'll be able to get more in the weeds on slate dynamic stuff. And I think that'll be a fun thing to see evolve. What about on the team level stuff? I see the pace obviously up there. Mm-hmm. Does the normalize work for that as well? Like if you're ratcheting up the pace here, does that trickle down into all the individual stuff if you normalize it?
It does, but it doesn't need to be normalized. So like it's just automatically.
Yeah.
If you change points scored to 12, it won't change anything down here because it's just a market share of 12 now, as opposed to
the pie is big or smaller.
As opposed to exactly, yeah. So you as you guys were talking about examples where that stuff could be useful. Pete, we've talked about this on Lowe's, like Showdown is a good one for like if you like, even though you're not smarter than Vegas. If you want to go like, well, what if the game is really low scoring and you change the points scored and then run and then see what lineups pop? If for some reason it's low scoring and you benefit really well from that, like you was talking about, make these changes where you actually gives you a shot of winning these dramatic changes. Showdown's a good one where you just change, make the score, 48, 44. What would the best lineups be if the score is really high? Now I will say I'm thinking about adding smart adjust for this, Pete, because when you change the score, the pace should also change. But it might get complicated there, and rush rates should probably change too, but I don't know if I'm going to do that. Another change we did is that the ownership is there, that you can adjust and normalize as well. So like if you think Kyler is going to be higher owned, he's on every podcast you're listening to, you could just raise him up, normalize, and it'll normalize across all the QBs. So it'll just Burrow.
Oh, that's really cool.
And same thing with all the position players. It does the same thing with the position players. You can do that and normalize them. And then this will, so I didn't want to guarantee it, but it will very shortly adjust the field too. So whatever you change it to, the field will now resemble what you think it should look like, what that ownership number is.
Which that is then going to trickle down into what the sim is outputting as the best lineups. Like if, say, we were looking at those Geno Smith lineups, if we ratcheted up Geno Smith's ownership to 50%, it's probably not going to like a couple of Geno Smith lineups at the top would just be my
You could probably try it right now and see.
Let's do it, Brian.
Okay.
LV there. Third game.
I got my camera in front of me, so it's hard to.
There you go. So 4.29% in this. Let's giga boost him here.
While he's doing that, Pete, do you have any takes since you've been following closer than we have?
Well, I do think it's interesting to me that we don't have like any game environments really separating. The highest totals we have are like close around 47, 48 and a half, nothing over 50. So people aren't like gravitating to a game of the week, but there are some spots people are very excited in. We mentioned the rookies there. I think there's going to be a lot of ownership there. There's also seems to be a lot of interest in the Jacksonville and Carolina game. I think just kind of two
up and coming offenses
in the rookies. Yeah.
I have a take on that then. Let's
get it.
With the Emeka Bua ownership that might be coming.
Yes.
With Tampa not having their stud tackle, Trendon Wirfs, I think I saw like some of the line trending towards under. It's like a massive hole to like need to shore up for the week one. So if he's going to come in with pretty good ownership, and like probably Evans isn't going to go unowned, even Drake London, could see that game play much slower, especially with like the way Tampa was scoring last year and just exclusively throwing the ball. I think with like the turnover, might want to get into like Falcons D or something, Falcons Bijan, fade, go for an under.
Yeah, I like that because it's almost like it kind of tricks fantasy gamers in that they get excited that it's a condensed offense and it makes it easier. Yeah. It's like, oh, of course Igbuka is going to see it. Of course now K-Dot's stepping into a role. But if like the offense just isn't as functional, it being condensed isn't really actually that helpful.
It's not as great of a angle as it could be because Baker, I think, is priced high. So if Baker isn't going to be that owned, it'd be much better if Baker was like 6K or something, and then the whole team would be like, 10 to 15% across the board.
Yeah.
But still, it's something to take away from an environment that might be exciting to people on offense.
All right, Brian, what happened to Geno after we boosted his ownership here?
He's only in one of the top 20.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we basically 5x'd his ownership from like 4% to 20.
I jacked up to 17%.
17,
18%. So I moved it pretty darn high just to see if it would do anything, and it did.
I honestly think this is one of the coolest things about this, because if there's one thing where it's like I don't want to IKB the projections, like that's just like not.
But yeah, like actually what's really great is like this allows you to realize your ownership projection edge in a really tangible way. Because like before, if you're putting in an optimizer or sim, you don't really know how it's going to be reflected. But in here, it's like very clear the difference that was made. And I think it's for people who consume a lot of content.
This is actually where I think the skill expression could shine through, because you do get a really good feel for because I do it on my Sunday morning shows where I go through the ownership. I'm like, I'll take the higher, the lower on this. And I'm like, I hit pretty hard just because I listen to a ton of people. I see my chat, I see my comments. I can feel where sentiment's going. And the fact that you could come in here, actually change that in a numerical way and build better fields than your opponents will have, I think is super, super cool.
Yeah, that's the entire idea, that you can, because there's not, once the Sims got released, it kind of pushed the game back to like 2015 or whatever, where making your own projections and stuff was super beneficial, because you kind of have to come up with some of your own projections and ownership and ideas, because there's a lot of guys using Sims now. So being able to quickly adjust and test your ideas and theories is like almost mandatory at this point to play winning DFS.
Well, and I think what's really cool too is like, we often, myself included, bro science the like, oh, this guy's over 20%, he's a bad player. He's under 10%, that makes him a good player. Well, you can now go adjust that, run the lineups, see how much they're coming up, and almost find that sweet spot threshold for yourself of like, hey, I like this play at this percentage. I noticed there's a tipping point and Geno's no longer appearing in these after 15 percentage points of ownership. And that I think can help you actually triangulate how you want to play it in these contests.
It also gives you those slates where you're like, back in the day, like people would be like, oh, somebody's 45% owned, I'm just going to fade them because they're 45% owned. But it's, that is completely unscientific, obviously. Right. So like, if you think it's a bad play, lower their projection or raise their ownership or both, and then run it again and then see what the threshold point you mentioned is this at what point does this become a bad play? Because sometimes it's just, you have to play the guy.
I guess people want to be right pretty hard when a lot of the time the optimal decision is just play the 45% guy 30%.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, because that's fantasy in a nutshell, like the nuanced gray area, but people want to live in the absolutes on one end or the other. Does this lineup generated page, does it show you the percentage of like Geno Smith is appearing in 4% of these?
It will soon enough.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. That is one of the more pressing ads.
Yeah, because even I'm just eyeballing these running backs, and like there is a ton of diversity in these running backs. I mean, obviously a couple of the top names I'm seeing a couple of times, but the diversity tool is proving its name with how much.
You want to try running it, like now that you can eyeball it like this, try running it without the shady add-on.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
I did want to mention as it's running here. So you just unclick this and then rerun, and then you're good. The interesting about Shady's tool and Sims in general compared to optimizers is like if you have a 0.1 difference in an optimizer, the optimizer gives you the 0.1 lineup. It's a 0.1 higher. That's what an optimizer does. It says this lineup is better than that one, but it doesn't compare distributions, which Sims do. And then it doesn't compare in a portfolio level, which is what Shady's tool does. And oftentimes where an optimizer might spit that same guy in the lineup because it's 0.1 higher, 0.1 higher, 0.1 higher, when you mix in all these other aspects, he might only be in one of your top 20 or three of your top 20 or something. Where an optimizer just doesn't know that.
Yep.
Okay. Well, Gino's back.
And you're seeing right there off the top, you get the Igbuka.
A lot of Baker.
So, yeah, it looks like a much heavier concentration. Like I'm seeing Kamara in almost every one of those running back lineups. And the other one, I want to say I saw him in like 20% of the lineups.
A lot of Tampa Bay, looks like in general here. Yeah, Ibuka for sure. I would say the if you run this and then when you run the Shady one, if you just look at the EV differences too, also tells
these are going to be higher.
Yeah, and this, because and Shady's still be much lower because, like I said, he had one that was like 25% in the top 20, and we got to scroll down, down to 100 some lineups before we get into the 20s.
Because it's saying that this is the EV of a lineup in a vacuum, but in the context of your portfolio of, let's use that 20 example, it's actually worth more than it would be to someone by itself.
I'll tell you exactly how it works. So it takes the lineup and then it index, and then so we run a sim over this field you created based on your ownership guesses, and then the play-by-play sim iterates, and then all the lineups get a score, like a fake fantasy score, and then it indexes that lineup with a payout array to those lineups, like if they were in a contest, like a real DFS contest, and it would be like this lineup would have been 57th or something like that. And what's that? That makes, $10 or something, right? Minus your fee or something. And then that's the payout for that specific iteration. And then depending on how many simulations you do, your EV will be the average of that.
Yep. And
so to answer your question, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which I think is cool and helps people think about things through a different lens. And obviously, if you're someone who's just making 1 or 2 lineups a week, you probably don't need to be thinking about portfolio diversity. But if you're making 10 lineups, 20 lineups, do you guys have a tipping point where you think this tool would become very helpful?
Yeah, the $25 level, you can make you can do 5 lineups. It'll give you 5 lineups. Pick your, and if you don't like it, run it again. It's pretty good. It's $25 and it has the projections included. I'm thinking it's a really good deal. You could use the optimizer too, not in the sim yet. But so if you're like, I don't know, if you're like betting like $200-300 a weekend on the NFL, I would just do the $25 one. The only guy where we don't really service Pete is the bro who loves doing like the quarter arcade stuff, like 150 and in like the 25-cent, 10-cent ones.
Yeah.
Because
wants to make a ton of lineups, but the volume they're
right,
actually
because $200 a month is too
Could
much.
be the best quarter arcade player ever, though.
Well,
there
that's
you go.
They get the Shady tool.
If you use promo code Pete, he gets 10% off. So maybe he should do it. But yeah, for that guy, there's really no perfect solution there for the things we have. But I mean, I don't know what else we can do. We're going to add the projections to the caddy too, Pete. So for hand builders or late swapping and stuff like that, it'll overlay right on DraftKings, and you can just see the projections.
Cool. How does it work? You know, if people are in here fiddling with stuff, can they save a session as far as their market shares? Like, how does that work as far as like if you want to keep track of your work and your adjustments?
Good question, because if you navigate away from the sim runner, this app, it will delete. So you got to open another tab if you want to do something.
Okay.
Now that is a feature I think we should probably add where it saves the build.
Like a template or
because that's the way it works in the golf app already. It's just not in the NFL one.
Cool. Well, I know we're flying a little blind here for this week one. Just recording it earlier. Appreciate you guys accommodating the schedule. We'll obviously be doing this live on Friday afternoons going forward. But Youda, any other parting shots or pieces of wisdom here? If people are signing up with the promo code PEAK, get that 10% off. Dive in. Anything else they should know?
No, not really. Just if you were to sign up, you're going to see a lot of add-ons. So just stay tuned, and we're working on the fly.
Yeah. And then Brian, as far as like comms and stuff, obviously there's the Run the Sims Discord. You guys are obviously over at the in-game syndicate. Do you guys want to kind of explain to people at least like where communications, where the hub for some stuff will be if they have questions?
Discord's free, so the Run the Sims Discord. There's like a bugs channel, there's an NFL channel. Endgame is instructional videos and like DFS, and Youda puts bets in there. Adam put some bets in there, and that one's private though. So if your best bet would be the Run the Sims Discord.
Yep. I always like checking in on both of those Discords. Excited to mess with the tool this weekend as we build some lineups. Excited for you guys to get off to a fast start. And like I said, we'll be here every Friday going forward. I'll have these guys swinging by around 2:15 p.m. Eastern regularly on Fridays. We'll go for 45 minutes or so. Bullying the Sims, building some lineups, maybe messing with some portfolio diversification, all the stuff we did here, but we'll be able to get into a little more nitty gritty of slate specific stuff with more news, injuries, and all of that on Friday afternoon. So make sure you guys check out Run the Sims. Like I said, 10% off. Take advantage of that right now with promo code Pete. If you want to hop in there and use some of these, I'm very excited to play around with that ownership stuff as we get rolling. And we will see you guys next time on the Block Party and Bully the Sims. Peace.